Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Reckoning with Jason Herbert. Today, we're doing something a little dangerous. We're talking about Abraham Lincoln. We're talking about myth. We're talking about the Civil War. And yeah, we're talking about vampires. Because in 2012, Hollywood gave us Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, a film that on the surface sounds like pure pulp absurdity. Axe-wielding Lincoln, Southern slaveholders as literal bloodsuckers, night battles, secret diaries, supernatural conspiracies. And yet, the movie is smarter than it has any right to be. And it asks a question that Americans have been asking since 1865. Who was Abraham Lincoln? Really? Was he a man? Was he a myth? Was he a moral crusader? Or have we turned him into something supernatural because we need him to be? And to help us think through all of that, I'm joined by my dear friend and historian, Heather Cox Richardson, whose work on the Civil War era and the long arc of American democracy reminds us that the stories that we tell about the past are never just about the past. They're about right now. Because here's the thing. The 1860s were an era of political extremism, disinformation, violent polarization, existential arguments about the meaning of freedom, and the real fear that democracy might not survive. Sound familiar? So today, we're going to have some fun, but we're also going to get serious. We're going to ask a lot of stuff. Why do Americans keep turning Lincoln into something bigger than human? What does it mean that this film literalizes slavery as vampirism? Are vampires in this movie just monsters? Or are they a metaphor for systems that feed on human labor? Why do periods of crisis produce superhero presidents? And are we doing that again right now? We're going to talk about myth making. We're going to talk about memory. And we're going to talk about the Civil War as both history and folklore. And we're going to test the wild idea that a supposedly ridiculous action movie might actually tell us something profound about American democracy. So grab your axe. I'm Jason Herbert, and this is A Reckoning. My name is Jason Herbert. I'm a Southerner who lives in the West. I'm a historian, an outdoorsman, and a movie buff. I like finding new answers to old questions, and this is A Reckoning. Are we going to pretend that we haven't been talking for an hour already? Is that what we're doing? Are we doing the cold open?
No, this is
right
where
now?
you say, such a pleasure to meet you.
No, I met you years ago, and I've known you for years now, and like it's a pleasure knowing you for years, and it's a pleasure like kvetching to you whenever I'm frustrated, and such, and then also on occasion being told by you to get my head out of my tuchus. So, which I've heard from you more than once, and I'm proud
I hope
to
I
have
put
that
it more
honor.
nicely than that.
You know, I remember the very first time when I was in graduate school, I sent you some of my writing and you looked at it, you read it, and you were like, and before you said back, you're like, look, this comes from a place of love. Okay. Don't take this personally. I was like, oh Christ. And it was like, it's just like boom, 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 boom. And I was like, oh, this is how someone really edits your stuff.
So that came from the fact that one of my dearest graduate students came into my office once, not at Boston College, it was somewhere else, and said, you have got to stop doing that. And I was like, what? What did I do? And he goes, another graduate student is crying in the hall after talking to you. I'm like, what are you talking about? We just had a great meeting.
It's so good.
Well, what I learned to do is what I did with you, is to say, I'm going to be tearing your work apart because it's good and I want it to be better. And I realized I had to say the good part up front because all they were hearing was the bad stuff.
Yeah. And you know what? I forgot, I got to help out on your last two things. So I did not get to couch that in those words where I was like, Heather, this is okay. But I want you to know, the next time I'm reading your stuff on like, native country or whatever, I'm like, you know what? Here, that's fine. No.
Well, you do get, as a writer, you do get an eye. And sometimes it's just so obvious to you. And the more I write, I often edit things that are in print in my head and think, oh, why did you add that last sentence? Or, oh, this should have been this way. And you don't even realize that you're doing it. And you can certainly hurt people's feelings when you just go straight to that rather than, listen, I like this piece enough that let me make some suggestions for making it stronger.
I had a job offer in Florida a few years ago, and one of the courses they wanted me to teach was like introduction to like historical writing. And I really struggle with that idea because for me, writing is such an intuitive thing. I just write. I don't know how to explain my process. I just open up and I write. And I feel like that's more of an art than anything else. And I could never I would sit and when I was grading stuff, I'd sit and break stuff down. It was always so difficult for me because I would find myself rewriting what they were trying to say in my head. And then you start changing the person's voice and all this. And all of a sudden they're producing a Jason Herbert piece instead of a Mary Smith piece or whatever. And I struggle. I really struggle with editing other people's stuff because it's such a personal thing for me whenever I'm writing.
I don't know if it's that way for me. I always think of writing as a craft, not an art. That is, there are certain things you just simply have to learn. And I learned it when my first job out of graduate school was teaching at MIT. And nobody really talked to me about how to teach writing. And so for some insane reason, I decided to have the students write a 5-paragraph essay every week that I would grade. And and that I would line it. And let me tell you, it was great for both of us. They learned to write and I learned to write. But what I will say is after years of writing every night, writing, probably an average of 1,500 to 2,000 words a night, somebody said to me once, probably a decade ago, they just sat down. We were sitting next to each other and we each got an assignment and he just started typing. And I was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, how can you just start writing? Like, how do you know what to write? And he looked at me like I had 3 heads and said, can't you hear the music? And I was like, no, I don't hear any music. What music are we talking about here? He was significantly older than I was. And I will say after, more than 6 years of writing every night, I can hear the music. And I just write down what that music says. And I'm not even necessarily aware that I'm doing it. I'll write down a sentence and then I'll write the next sentence and I'll realize that I'd missed the music in the first sentence. And so that I think is maybe more of an art than a craft, but boy, it's meant a lot of hours with my ass in the chair, as they say.
No, it does, right? But it's like, with my own writing now, it's like when I sit down and start writing, it comes. Now, it'll take me 2 hours to put out a Substack piece because I will sit and just dive and deeply for me, the writing becomes such an emotional piece where there are days when I can't write because I can't mine that. I can't go to that well too many times in a row, right? Like we're talking about that piece that I took down. Like it's an emotional journey for me to get in there, but that's just because maybe the nature of the stuff that I write about. But like we were talking earlier, hard. It is. But also if you just sit down and write, like the Substack's so great because it just forces you to write and you write and you write and you write and write. And you get really good at it. I mean, that's just by default. So if you're out there, kids listening, write a whole bunch of and I tell people, just write whatever. Find the rhythm, find the voice and things like that. We're not talking about writing today. We're talking about watching. Is that a segue that we're doing? All right,
that works.
Does it? Okay, all right.
Speaking of writing, can I just say the word segue completely pisses me off.
Why?
Because it isn't spelled like it sounds at all. It's like they just went and found a whole bunch of random letters and threw them into some kind of order and then said, oh, we're going to pronounce that segue. They could as well have pronounced it like luxury yacht,
Heather, is this your first introduction to the English language? None of our rules make sense.
But come on, segue is the worst by far. S-E-G-U-E.
Seg? It's just a UE. It's a way.
Segway should be S-E-G-W-A-Y. Thank you very much.
There is, and they have that.
You have to ride
it's like it's a rider. You can scoot around town. So you can okay. Segue transition sounds too formal.
You will never see that word in my writing. I hate it. I hate that word.
Okay, so what word can we use? Movement.
Transition works.
Does it though? I'm just like, all right, fine. We're here now. There's no segue, there's no transition. We're gonna do a hard jump and just go from there. All right, I don't even know where to start. We've been talking for an hour already. Let's do this. We're talking about Lincoln, but before we get into this, hi, it's good to see you again.
It's lovely to see you. Do you want to tell people how we met? It was really quite random.
I had no idea who you were when we met, and you had no idea who I was. You tell the story. Like you started it. You not only are you responsible, you started. Not only
you
are
started it, Heather. You started it.
You straight up started this, and I've told the story so many times. I'm like, and I was saying in my head, I was like, Heather can tell the story this time. I'm not doing it anymore. This is it. From now on, I'm just gonna like press play on the pod here now. Because you're responsible for this podcast. Because I remember very clearly, you should just take this and just go to another level. So thank you for God for none hours that I do on this. But let's bring this back to Twitter, back in the before times.
I don't remember what year it was. I do know I was writing How the South Won the Civil War. So it was summer. Yeah. And I, as you know, am very tightly wrapped on social media. I never pick fights. I always I'm always trying to model really good behavior. And just so you know, I often retort and erase it. I mean, I bet I post less than half of what I write. But you wrote on Twitter, I had just had a really, really good writing day. So I was like, happy and loaded for bear. And I came into, I'd been writing, and I came into the kitchen, and I was looking at what was then Twitter, and you posted something, and I had been following you, obviously, and I don't remember why, probably because you were writing about indigenous stuff, and that's an interest of mine.
Turtles. It was the turtles.
Oh, it was the turtles. It was the
remember,
turtles.
I was posting pictures of gopher tortoises. I was in Florida, and I was like, because I remember you messaged me one day, like, what's with the turtles? Because I like them. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Although I thought that came after.
Well, that conversation came afterwards. But I think you were. I think you had followed me because I was
the turtles.
Maybe something like that. Either way.
So, you posted sort of randomly that you were on campus somewhere, and they only had Pepsi, and nobody in their right minds would drink Pepsi, and it was just this really aggressive, sort of in-your-face tweet about how bad Pepsi was.
Awful.
And I would never normally take that bait, but I was like, la, 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 I'm so happy. I had such a great day. And I wrote back, those are fighting words. Pepsi is the nectar of the gods.
Mm-hmm.
And we were off to the races, right? So that became a fight between the two of us. And this is during Trump's first term, right? Because then all these people got involved, and then we got involved in American culture, and it built this new kind of community of academics and journalists and people involved in what became known as the soda wars on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And kept us entertained for like I still every once in a while have communications with some of those people about wingdings or whatever, or yoo-hoos or whatever they were.
Well, it went, that Twitter thread went 5 weeks. I mean, it just would not die. And it turned into this thing where it was like, you're absolutely right. It was like, it went from Pepsi and Coke, Annette loves Dr. Pepper and Joanne loves Fresca. Like Kevin Cruz wants tea, but not sweet tea, even though he's from Nashville. And I think I know all of these people intimately by the food and then it became barbecue and pizza, and it just kept going.
Yeah, people started sharing meals. There were people who met up in places to have barbecue together.
Fun.
It was great.
It felt more innocent.
What was great about it was that there was so much anger in the country over politics and over the really hideous things that were happening, that many of us were people who were not participating in that at all. And so it was like this fake fight over food that was actually building friendships and helping to highlight different regional cuisines. So it became like this, I don't know, it was kind of like hanging out with your college friends, bitching about about each other without it being real, and without that anger being real. And it it was wonderful. And as I say, a lot of friendships came from that. Joanne and I got much closer at that point too. And of course, we're still working together.
Sure. Yeah. And for me, and I'll tell you that became this thing when I started to realize that I was a graduate student then. We got a lot of new listeners today, I'm sure. But so I was a graduate student then. And what it became was like this opportunity to like break down these barriers between, say, grad students and people like yourself or Joanne or whomever, right, at these other positions. And then we kind of discovered, oh, wait a second, like we all have these things that we can do. And it just felt fun and it felt different. The social media at the time, and we'll talk about social media later on, but it's like, I hate to memorialize or romanticize, 9 years ago, but it felt different. I think it was like 2017. It just felt sweeter and kinder then. And then, the movie thing happened with the watch party, the National Treasure. And then we just kept going, and me.
That didn't the watch party start when there was a similar discussion about whether or not Die Hard was a Christmas movie? Isn't that where that started?
The watch party itself started there was an old adage between so it's funny. Okay. So the very first tweet that you and I ever had, I was actually watching a baby at a conference for my friends, for my friend, who is this amazing scholar. And she was like, hey, she's like, would you drive up to Gainesville and hang out with my baby while I could do this conference? I was like, yeah. And that's when I posted that picture of me and him and stuff. But she's an archaeologist. And so there's this old adage between archaeologists and historians, right? Archaeologists get Harrison Ford. They get Indiana Jones. Historians get Benjamin Franklin Gates. We get Nicolas Cage, right? We get National Treasure, which was this completely different film, but it's fun and silly. But everybody loves it. So we were like, I just noticed it was like, let's watch it one night. And I remember texting Joanne. Joanne did not have a Netflix account at the time. And I remember texting back. She's like, should I get it? I'm like, Joanne, you teach at Yale. You can afford $10 a month. I'm sure that they pay you more than that. She's like, okay. And of course, it was her that night when we had it on. And since then, the screenwriters of the film came on that night, and they were tweeting along, and they've since been on the podcast with Joanne as well, the Wibberleys, who were amazing, right? But she had never seen the movie before, and she lost her freaking mind when they put the lemon juice on the back of the DUI. I was just going to say,
I remember that because I was actually along that day, and I also got Netflix for that night. It's a hard night. It was always a hard night for me because it was Sunday night, which is Buddy's only free night for 8 months out of the year. So I stopped participating. But I just remember when they put the lemon juice on the Declaration of Independence, and she was like, what? They're putting... like, Joanne, it's a movie. They didn't really do that, Joanne.
Yeah, it was this great thing, right? And you mentioned stop participating. Like, I've tried to stop participating in this damn thing so many times since 2018, both with the watch party, and I was getting these foul moods, and I'm like, I'm just going to quit. And then I'd get a message from you. No, you're not. Yeah. You're going to keep going. And then I was going to quit the whole thing. And then in 2022, you're like, no, you actually need to take this into a pod. And then the podcast turned into Historians at the Movies. And then last year, we kind of rebranded into Reckoning because we wanted to talk about other stuff. I mean, but we're still doing that today. So I guess this is an homage to the original thing, I guess.
Well, if I can get all historical here, I think that it is a sign of the different ways in which we can use social media because, yes, friendships, that matters obviously a lot. And the arts for sure. But there's so much education that is going on in these funny ways. Like you're doing really cutting edge history when you're talking about whether or not a movie is portraying something accurately or not. And it's just really digestible. That's kind of what you and I do, right? Is we take little bits of history and make it digestible. And in the scheme of things, if you're trying to, preserve the Enlightenment values that the country is established on, you don't want people to feel like the only way they can learn about history or sociology or whatever is to, go to a 4-year college and plunk themselves down in a chair. You actually want it in the water, and we're helping to put it in the water.
Yeah, I feel like I want to be accessible, right? I've never, and you and I have talked about this. I come from nothing. I come from a trailer in Kentucky and Louisiana, and I've never really thought of myself as a quote unquote academic. I just, one of my guests the other day said, he's like, you're really just like a regular guy who happens to have a PhD. And I was like, well, that's exactly what I am. Like, I've never felt that way. And I think you and I have always kind of had that kinship because I'm like, I just want to talk about cool stories. Yeah. In different ways, right? Books are great. I'm surrounded by them right now. I've got bunches of them everywhere, including yours. But I can do different things. We can do different things with social media and be accessible, and you're really the person on this, but between your Substack and I can't get on the internet without seeing you. popping up. I'm like, oh, hey, you're over there. Okay. All right. I see how it is. All right. That's cool.
A lot of it's
Where you
AI
have to,
now, but
oh my gosh. Well, and I have bad news for you. It's actually me feeding the prompts. So it's like, I'm like, imagine Heather Richardson in the Civil War.
Okay, so there's one of those that's really pissing me off these days.
Tell me.
I mean, whatever. So I had a favorite shirt that I loved. I loved the shirt. It wore like iron. It was, you could dress it up, you could dress it down, the whole thing. And I've lost it. I don't know where it's gone. And somebody in this AI stuff has gotten a picture of me in that shirt, and they're making it as if it's still here. And I keep looking at it going, I want that shirt back. I don't want you to AI it. I want to find it again. So every time somebody just this morning said, is this really you? And I'm like, no, but that's my shirt.
Are you getting on that? I mean, because we've seen that, I'll see you do this from time to time, like, hey, this is my only account, or this. Are you getting a lot of impersonators now? Is that the price that you've had to pay for like becoming a voice to the masses? And what does that like do for you?
There's a ton of them. And I will say, YouTube is very, very good about taking them down. Facebook is not at all, but YouTube is very good about it. And they have a facial recognition system themselves that catches almost everything now. We were getting like 4 or 5 new producers a day that were coming up with crap. And so they're very good about it. But it's the thing that I think is heartbreaking, and I really wish we had laws about this, is not really so much from my side, but people who are watching me and they're like, wait, that doesn't sound, they're confused. And it's like, that's not fair. And the other one that makes me really bonkers is the people who engage with, or bots or whatever, who engage privately with people who think they're talking to me.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it appears that they're going to be fishing for money to sell something, but also it just feels like they're harvesting information. And then it also just feels like such an extraordinary invasion of privacy and trust. And, there was one person who said, I just had I've been talking to you for days over on Telegram, and I'm starting to think it's not you. And I'm like, I hate to tell you this, but I'm not on Telegram. So whoever you're talking to is not me. And just imagine what that feels like for that person. And I had nothing to do with it, but my name is involved in it. And that just breaks my heart. I feel like there absolutely should be laws against that.
No, it's hurting people, right? Because they're getting excited. They're looking to you for guidance, frankly, in this time, right? So many times I'm like, Heather Richardson's the reason why we can sleep at night, right? And I'm like, well, I know Heather, but it's like it's true though. People are really looking to you for like this sense of comfort. And there's you mentioned this a little bit earlier about like typing stuff out and then deleting it, and so many times, as someone who looks to you as one of my mentors, I look at this and I'm like, don't engage. This is beneath you to like go in and like, from talking to myself, to like engage in some of these flame wars and things like that. That's not where you need to be. And I'll see the way that you handle yourself, or Annette, Joanne, right? All my heroes are women. So it's like, I see that and I'm like, this is the model for how for the discourse, because I can't be out there flame throwing with everybody. It's not productive, and it's not, frankly, I don't think it's very good for my psyche either, because you and I get so passionate about the things that we see, the misinformation that's out there, and I want to go swinging away at everybody, and I can't. I don't know how you do it, because you've got so many people coming at you all the time. You see all this stuff. And Heather, I have to imagine you end up being the target from some really bad operators out there. And I worry, me, I'm fine. But like for you, you're such a voice that I don't know how you balance these things on like a very personal level.
Well, so one of the things that that I always tell to my students, my graduate students primarily, is that never pick fights down. Like you never punch down under any circumstances, because that's just not fair.
Right.
Punch up all you want. But what I always say to them is, don't pick fights for the sake of picking fights. And you and I both know people who do that, because, sometimes you can make yourself look better by finding somebody famous and picking a fight with them. But the one thing I would say is, if you're going to make enemies, there are good enemies to have, and just make sure you pick the right enemies. And by that, I mean, if you're going to start flamethrowing or whatever, use it. Like now, of course, I can't think of it, but I went big time after somebody once, and I don't remember who it was. Somebody I was punching up. Now I don't remember who it was, but like I threw a lot behind that, and I'm like, yeah, I'd meet this guy in court. I'd do whatever. Because it's not a question of being a doormat. It's a question of protecting public discourse when somebody's just cranky versus using your accumulated power to take on the powers that be in a way that's really effective. I will say, I do think a lot of what I do, and that is very hard on me, is a lot of what I do is absorb other people's frustration and pain. And that I get that that's because I'm a mother and I'm a teacher. I get that that's a lot of what we do. But a lot of people write to me because they are upset. And I understand that impulse, but it's hard to read email after email after email about, people who are furious at the United States or furious at the Senate or whatever. I get their fury. There's nothing I can do about that. And so I just absorb it. And that is not good. It is a role I'm playing in this moment. I do recognize it's not about me, but that is hard.
No, I mean that's this role you've taken on is like this guidance kind of thing. It's like here, you've been historically contextualizing things for a long time, but then now it's like it's almost like this role of reassuring people at times that it's going to be okay, and I don't know always that it's going to be okay when I look at the world around me. And like I said, for you to have to, take that on the letters and stuff like that, like people come to you, like I've been with you in public and people just like, hey, you're you, blah, blah, blah. Like it's on a very personal level. It's got to be difficult to separate the work from the person at times.
Not for me. Really? And I think that's an advantage of being older. And, it's like being a teacher or a mom, a father. I am, I do what I do, and I think that it is not about me. I think it is. I think of myself as a coffee pot that a lot of people are gathering around, and I never make the mistake of thinking it's because I am special. A lot of people think that, and maybe that's one of the advantages of being older. I am so ordinary a person, as you well know. I have some skills that have made me able to do something in this moment that other people weren't able to do. But I never make the mistake of thinking that it's about me, because it's not. It's about the American people and where they are in this moment. So I don't have any problem with that at all. And it is an enormous joy to be able to share with people the things I care about. So like when we're recording this today, I expect tonight to be writing, believe it or not, about sugar policy in the late 19th century. Well, it turns out I didn't understand that terribly well. And getting to dig into some late 19th century tariff acts, that's what I love to do. So I'm going to write that. And now anybody who's listening to this pod, this will come out after this letter does, is probably thinking, who cares about the Dingley tariff? I promise you, by the time that I get to put it into a letter, it will be digested to the point that you care about it. And then there'll be all these people around the country who understand the Dingley tariff, right? That's great.
It's funny you mentioned sugar because I'm about to take it on myself down in the Everglades because it's big sugar down in South Florida is just absolutely poisoning the glades. And there's this huge problem right now where Big Sugar is pushing legislators to come to shut down on First Amendment rights, people speaking out towards the pollution that's going on down there. It is, so you and I are dealing in different
I didn't
centuries
know that.
Sugar.
I didn't know about that.
I'll tell you more about it later.
We should plot.
Yeah.
But I have a Florida story for you. I was just in Florida.
Where were you? We talked the other night. You were in Florida because I messaged you. It was super late, and I knew you'd be up.
That's right. I was in. I think by then I was in New York, but I was in Florida. I was in Fort Lauderdale.
My apologies.
But I'd never been. I had driven over the Everglades. I'd never been in them, and so we did. But I got a story for you. So I had never seen an alligator.
What?
A lot in the wild. Every time I go to Florida, it's cold and they all leave.
It's because you didn't visit me when I was there.
That's correct. But I don't know if you remember Burt Wyatt Brown, who was this great scholar
Yes,
of the American South. Okay, well,
absolutely.
he and his wife were dear, dear friends of mine. And I used to say to Bert, I don't believe in alligators. There's never any alligators down here. I don't believe in alligators. I'm just pulling his leg, right? So one time I saw him he was at University of Florida, and their thing is a gator. So I actually have a little gator pin from Bert. But anyway, so we're on this tour to see the Everglades. The birds, of course, are amazing. And the woman next to me is from another country. She barely spoke, so I couldn't quite place her accent. But we finally, like all these years, I am 63 years old. We're going along, and the guide goes, look over there. There's an alligator. And there's this 13-foot alligator just laying in the grass along the water. And I turned to the woman beside me and I said, oh my God, they're real. And she looks at me and she goes, or not. We wouldn't know if it was just plastic, would we? And I was like, oh crap. So then we see another one and I'm like, is that real or is that just something? Because realistically, I'm going to do that once in my life. For all I know, they got statues out there. So I'm looking at this other one. I'm like, that sucker's not moving either. And then finally, the third one we saw was swimming in the water. And I'm like, yes, it is alive. It's not just a statue.
They are everywhere down there. Actually, I was talking to the Miccosukee chairman recently, Talbot Cypress. He's coming on to talk about like what they're going to be doing. I mean, they've been fighting off down there. Miccosukee tribe was really fighting off Alcatraz down there. I mean, they were the prime movers.
And didn't Trump just screw them over because they stood against the detention center?
Well, yeah, but you know what? So I talked to tribal members about this kind of stuff too, about like Trump trying to do that and so forth, and so forth. And they say, look, we've been fighting this fight for 500 years. Welcome to the sides. So it's for them. I don't want to speak for all tribal people or anything like that, but it's the conversations I've had with folks down there and also folks out here in the mountains. It's like, look, this is just another day. We're always going to be fighting these fights over sovereignty and protecting the environment and that, right? But the Everglades are so special. And did you see the pythons down there? Did they tell you about them?
No, we weren't there long. They did tell us about them. Have you seen them?
Oh, yeah. No, my former mother-in-law was in charge. She used to run the South Florida Water Management District, and it was under her, Carol, who is this incredibly brilliant woman. I just said that about my former mother-in-law for the record. She's incredibly brilliant. But she was the person they started the python rodeos down there to start trying to, and the pythons are not going away at this point in time. They are naturalized down. But they're everywhere. And the pythons, since they've kind of gotten into the glades, have eradicated, I think, 90% of the fur-bearing population down there. So when you see rabbits or possums or raccoons or whatever, they look terrified down there. They're everywhere. And I've actually got a python hunter coming on the pod soon to talk about. I want to go down. I want to go do it. Like
there's a bounty on them, right?
Yeah. And Carol started that, like for people to go out there and go get these animals out of there, because now that they've become. I mean, you'll see pictures of like alligators and pythons, like death battles, and you'll see pythons cut open with alligators inside of them, and alligators eating pythons. It's it's alive.
The pythons are released into the wild from people who had them captive, right? But where are they indigenous to?
These are indigenous to Southeast Asia, if I'm correct, because these are ball pythons, and that's specific. And that's the specific species that's taken. I used to make this joke about when I was writing my dissertation about the introduction to cattle in Florida. I'm like, if you're familiar with Florida, you know that it is prone to invasion by exotic destructive pests. We've got lionfish and pythons and iguanas and people from Jersey. There's just there's no shortage of I apologize to Jersey, but they're at this point in time they're everywhere. And like right now, if you were down there right now, it was cold when you were there. Like they had the falling iguanas.
Yeah. It was quite cold. And one of those exotic species you wrote about in your dissertation, which is cattle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that, I thought that was really interesting because I had written about the Battle of Allusty, which, by the way, in the anniversary is coming right up, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And that was, they were trying desperately, the Union was trying desperately to protect inroads into the cattle, and the Confederacy was trying desperately to keep the cattle from the Union, right?
Yeah. So Florida actually supplied a lot of cattle to the Confederacy during the war. And that, Heather, might be our segue into this. Yes, I wrote about cattle, and thank you for not asking me how the book is coming along. But
it's coming.
Is it? Is it coming along? Like
the question is coming.
Well,
hey, Alracia, I'm trying to finish a book too. We should add it to our empty calendars.
Have I told you about the second book, the one I'm really writing?
No, are you allowed to say on the pod?
Well, if someone rips me off, I'll beat them up. It's I'm writing a cultural
notes here.
It's the cultural history of the catfish. Like that's
a good idea.
That's the story I'm writing, because it's the fish of the people.
Yes, it is. That's a great idea.
Lower and working class people, my whole family, like there's quite literally like my grandfather's remains are in like a little plastic container in the shape of a catfish around here somewhere.
Is a catfish indigenous to the U.S.?
Yeah. Certain species are. Of course, North America is full of like invasive species, right? But here's the cool thing about catfish, right? People of all races harvest catfish in the United States, right? And you'll see, if you get on the internet, no shortage of, frankly, poor and working class white and black families catching this fish, right? I mean, it feeds families. This is not people look at a catfish and they're like, this is kind of gross. It's not a beautiful fish like a mahi or a swordfish. It's not exotic. It's not triumphant. Hemingway wouldn't be writing about a catfish. Maybe he would. I don't know. But and then you have all these immigrant communities who come into the United States, like from Vietnam, where there's a very strong catfish population there. And then they're able to kind of transfer like their relationship to that animal there, to their relationship to this animal here. And they're able to form these whole other communities around, again, in part based on their relationship to this animal. So I think it's fascinating. I get to eat a lot.
When did they first start showing up in the literature?
I haven't figured it out yet. I'm just now starting to I'm actually kind of working backwards on this, because my whole family. So tomorrow's my grandfather's birthday, my late grandfather's birthday, and he was a catfisherman. He ran. Do you know what a trout line is?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
yes.
he
but
ran.
Not everybody lines. Does probably. So
right. It's like a long line. It's a big long line that's hundreds of yards long that you would put out in the lakes or rivers. My family in Tennessee River and Kentucky Lake, and you put you put bait on there, and catfish will come up and bite the hook. It's almost like some of these long lines you'd have in the ocean, just a smaller version of it, right? And then we'd sell those things at market. My father caught catfish for a living. My grandparents, my mother did. I have all these pictures of women in my family catching catfish. It goes along both men and women. It's fascinating. It's a story that's out there that when I told the story, I did my grandfather's eulogy and centered it around the story of this magical catfish we have stories of called Ekenhammer. And the dedication of my dissertation and the book is actually to Ekenhammer.
Right.
Because if you know that name, you know what I'm talking about. And it becomes the story of this family. So yes. Do they eat catfish in the Civil War? Some people, we're half an hour into this thing. People are I thought a movie was what you were, you said you were going to talk about a movie.
I can't believe they didn't eat catfish. I mean, one of the things that growing up rural is you realize how much of consumption before the late 20th century was local stuff. I will never forget having a conversation with a historian about, talking about the lack of calories in an enslaved population, and me sort of saying, what about squirrels and fish and he looked like he was like a deer in the headlights. And he's like, I never thought about that. And I thought, well, let me tell you, literally growing up in the rural community, people made ends meet by hunting and by grabbing fish or mussels and by eating stuff that grew alongside the road.
Well, let me ask you a question then. Something you've never been asked on a podcast before. Have you eaten squirrel?
I have not eaten squirrel. No,
it's good. It's good.
I'm not going to argue with you. It seems a little too little for me to think. I mean, I assume you stew it, right, and then you pick the meat off.
It tastes like rabbit. If you've had rabbit, it tastes which shouldn't surprise you. They're both rodents, right? You fry it. You quarter it, you fry it, and then the big thing they do in the South is you make gravy from the fond that's
Drippings.
left over,
Yeah.
from the drippings and stuff like that, and you have like squirrel gravy with like biscuits and stuff like that. I know this is gonna sound weird to people, but I love it. It's great. It's just the problem is you have to shoot these really adorable creatures that are frolicking in the woods. So, which I've done. So either way, all right. Let's talk about other people frolicking in the woods. Why, of all things, Heather? We've been talking about doing a pod for like 3 years. Okay, so this podcast was entirely your idea. I blame all of this on you. All of this.
Join the club. Everybody blames everything on me.
I blame. Well, I've got a list around here somewhere. You and I talked about a bunch of movies, and we were talking a couple weeks ago, and you were like, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I was like, what the fuck? Fine. All right, fine. Let's do it.
No, you didn't think I was. You texted back, ha ha ha. What do you really want to do, or something like that?
Well, I thought we were going to do Sweet Home Alabama for the longest time.
Which I still want to do. I still want to do that one too.
And we'll get to that within the first hour of talking, audience. I promise. But you were like, when you said Abraham Lincoln, I was like, fine, let's do it. Let's absolutely go. So why this movie, Heather, and why now of all films? Why Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter?
So first of all, people who hear the title seem to assume that it's just a, sort of cheap horror movie. Mm-hmm. And it's really not. I actually would love to talk to the screenwriter and the director, because I actually think, there are some issues that I have with the film. And mind you, I'm a very unsophisticated film watcher because I grew up basically without film. But it is a really profound meditation on the meaning of a nation in which there are people who have been able to garner power and exist by living on other people. And in the United States, of course, and they talk about this a lot in the movie, those are the enslavers in the American South. Mm-hmm. Who are the vampires. They're the ones who are living on the non-vampire population, the men as opposed to monsters, which they actually set up verbally a couple times in the movie. And that idea of what it means to fight what is essentially an ideology. I mean, it's characterized in this film by vampires, but an ideology that will not die and that will destroy everything in its path if you let it. And how you fight that's really what the movie is about. How do you fight that ideology, and what are the costs of it? And that I actually love this movie.
Yeah, I rewatched it after we agreed we were going to do this, and we'd done this on the watch party on the Sunday night thing a few years back, and it was fun. And I remember being really taken with the visuals. I'm a sucker for a montage, right? And I will fight everyone from Indiana and Illinois over Lincoln's legacy as a Kentuckian. But watching it now with a more critical eye was like, oh, wait, they're quite literally feeding on these people. And there's all these systems of imbalance. And then, look, I hate to make this serious now, but did I see Trump posting pictures of the Obama family, as gorillas, and thinking, wait a second, the elites are still doing this and putting black folk in this, in this position. Like we're still fighting this fight.
So that was my reason for wanting to do it in this moment, is that through line of these things that won't die, this ideology that won't die, that lives on other people, is really what drew me to the film when it first came out, because that idea that ideology is there and that it's got to be fought, and that Lincoln was part of that, I really liked as a political historian. But I'll tell you, watching it again for this was really quite moving in some ways, because are we allowed to talk about what happens, or is that a spoiler?
Absolutely. This movie's been out for 14 years, so go see it.
So, there's a lot about legends, myth and legends versus actual men. But when Lincoln first becomes recruited to fight these vampires, not realizing that that's what he's up against, there's somebody who does something bad to his best friend who is black, and then it goes on to hurt his mother and to kill his mother. When he's first recruited, not understanding that that's not just a bad man, that this is part of this larger system of people who feed off others. The vampire who recruits him, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that he doesn't know it's a vampire at the time. That's going to come out, because I think that's interesting too, that there are good vampires as well, that aren't able to fight because they're not, the way this universe is set up, the vampires can't kill each other. Mm-hmm. So they have to actually work with humans to kill the vampires. And I thought that was one of the more interesting parts of the movie. But the guy says to Lincoln, if you do this, if you fight, you are going to be, you won't have a family, you won't have friends. This is going to become your life. And, for somebody who is now spending every waking moment doing nothing but writing and recording things and trying to fight back against these same vampires, boy, that was like a knife, But then, there are other things in that where they talk about how you fight against that. And there's this line about, real power comes not from hate, but from truth. Right. And this whole, the whole idea of how you fight against that ideology, couched though it is in the concept of fighting vampires, I found really helpful in this moment for thinking about what that actually looks like, including the way that they finally end up taking them down.
I felt, you mentioned Henry, like the good vampire in this. And I think there's, something just popped in my head about the self-loathing of vampires in pop culture. And I'm thinking about Interview with the Vampire, Brad Pitt's character, like absolutely hates being a vampire. And I'm thinking, wait a second, if vampires or if slaveholders are innately vampires, is Henry, played by Dominic Cooper, is he kind of like a Jeffersonian dude, right? Who's writing all this stuff about the freedom of man and things like that, and yet still possesses human beings as property. And I'm kind of I'm wondering if they're kind of tapping into these dual ideas. Like, yeah, I'm a vampire, but I hate it. There's all these different ideologies we can play with this film and talk about this.
Well, and there's a moment when Willie, Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd's son, dies because he's been bitten by a vampire, and the Henry says, "I can bring him back."
Yeah, and
Lincoln says, don't, and Mary's like, yeah, go for it. And Lincoln's like, no, he won't be our son anymore. And that, that taps right into that there's an awful lot of things that living off other people you think would bring to you, but they're all poisonous.
Well, ultimately what we've seen with the wealthy and these folks is that you ultimately lose your humanity by doing so, right? You lose every last beat. The guy in the White House right now has no shred of humanity in him at all. And he's like, if he were cast in this film, I know exactly which side he'd be on here. I have a question though. We talk about this in terms of like Abraham Lincoln, vampire hunter. Why, Heather, there's a really interesting thing going on here about the mythologizing of Lincoln as well, right? So why Lincoln, vampire hunter, and not James Buchanan or James K. Polk?
James Buchanan would have been a vampire.
Oh, yeah, right? Absolutely would have been.
He would have been on the wrong side. Well, I think he's sort of the ultimate vampire hunter, right? He's the person in our mythology who stood against that ideology. I think it might be a fun exercise to figure out who else would have been fighting on his team. But that's actually, I think, a powerful moment when Lincoln goes off to the theater at the end of the film, and his diary that explains all this goes to someone else.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be somebody who takes over, and that somebody, you could say would be, for example, James Garfield, who gets assassinated, and and then maybe Teddy Roosevelt. And what's key about all these guys is they're not mythological; they're just human beings, and they screw up a lot of stuff, but they're still engaged in fighting this bigger fight. I also think, to go back to the point of how you fight this, and I again, big spoiler, but vampires can only be killed by silver, right? So people have to give up economic things they care about in order to fight this battle. And that idea that it's going to cost you, literally it's going to cost you to fight this battle, I think is important. But then at this critical moment, the idea in the film is that Joshua Speed, who's a good friend of Lincoln's, and by the way, they pick up at the beginning of that Speed is not convinced at first that he wants to be on the side of the angels, because Speed, of course, in real life comes from a slave owning family. And they've got a plan for delivering this silver. And the Henry, the good vampire, if you will, believes that Speed has betrayed Lincoln and the guy with Lincoln. And he keeps saying to Lincoln, he's betrayed you, he's betrayed you, he's betrayed you. And Lincoln ignores him. And you're thinking, oh no, here we go. And Speed didn't betray him. He didn't become Judas, because they had a relationship that Lincoln trusted and that obviously Speed trusted. And then, of course, crucially in this film, Mary Todd Lincoln and Harriet Tubman are major players, using their ability to, as women, to be ignored, actually to deliver the goods. I mean, it's a pretty smart movie.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here as far as like pointing to these real things that happen. So someone was just in Justice like, is this the most historically accurate film? And I was like, actually, you're not far off. It's like when you look at these things, and you have studied not only the Civil War, Reconstruction, politics throughout the 20th century, but you also study the memory of these things and how that memory at times gets manipulated by different forces and stuff like that. And I'm kind of wondering, like, let's just talk about the Civil War itself. Are there misconceptions today that we're still fighting on a large scale, on the front lines of historical inquiry? I mean, what do people get wrong about the Civil War now?
Well, my favorite is that Reconstruction ended in 1877, but that's kind of beyond the pale for our conversation today. Yeah, I think this idea that the South was fighting for states' rights and honor and so on, that's very much a post-war construction. Mm-hmm. The American South was fighting to establish a nation run by vampires, to run, the idea of a nation built on the idea that some people are better than others and have the right to rule. And this is quite literally what Alexander Stevens talks about when he talks about the Cornerstone speech, is that this nation, their new nation, is built on enslavement, and that they want to make that international. This is the way of the future. And honestly, I look at that, and the very fact we didn't ever really punish anybody for engaging in that and so on is one of the reasons I think it persists. But when I look at the tech bros in the present, and I didn't mean to make that big a leap, because you could also stop at the robber barons in the late 19th century or Wall Street in the 1920s and early 1930s. But when I look at the tech bros, at their argument that in fact they should be able to destroy the United States government because they don't want to have regulations, they don't want to have to pay people decent wages, they don't want to have to hire Black Americans, brown Americans, and women, because they really think that the world will be better if they concentrate all the wealth that we produce in their own hands, so they can do things like get us to Mars, although Musk in the last 2 days has ratcheted that back to the moon, because apparently he just realized it's hard to get to Mars, which when I look at the way they talk, they are literally using the same ideological argument that we should be able to concentrate wealth because we will use it better than those people who are producing it and who will simply waste it in food or clothing or housing, and that we will do things like build rocket ships to Mars, or in Carnegie's case, libraries and concert halls, or in the enslavers' case, we're the ones who are going to invest in culture for the United States, which it doesn't have right now. And that idea that somehow this is a noble project in this moment, I think reads back onto them just how ignoble it was. And the other piece of that for me, reading backward, is what we are seeing now with the rise in the United States of white nationalism, which is certainly fascist and Nazi adjacent. To me, that's made me really rethink the political aspects of human enslavement. That is, people like, you can see it as a racial issue, you can see it as an economic issue. I think you see it just so thoroughly about power, if you use that lens, that's made me rethink a lot of these people. Because if you can impose them on the tech bros, you can also impose the tech bros on them. And that's really been illuminating for me.
Yeah, I was thinking about tech bros. I was thinking about energy. Like, this is all extractive, like quite literally sucking up the popular resources. And not just that, people who would like sell off public lands, the things that belong to the people, and these, these places that are saved, Heather, for common people to be able to use, who can't afford to go buy the mansion outside Aspen or whatever, right? And these people are like trying to sell off pieces of Idaho or Utah or this, that, and the other. It's quite, these vampires are still, the fight continues, right? And that's the thing that the film kind of leads off, is like, these vampires are not going away. They're just going to continue to take shape, and the fight, has to continue with these people.
Well, there's also, I think in the film, but in the present as well, there's a difference between wealth and cash. And one of the things that you think about, if you think about what makes your life worthwhile, you think about family, and you think about friends, and you think about books, and you think about whatever it is that makes you wealthy. And that is, it makes your life, your health, or, whatever, your ability to fish, whatever it is that gives your life not so much meaning as comfort and wealth. That when you say I am blessed, what do you mean? Well, a lot of those things you could turn into cash. You could sell your house and have cash instead. You could, there are many ways in which you can turn that wealth into cash. And that's what I feel like we're doing, is we're watching a nation that has been wealthy in the way that I'm describing it. That's not that everybody's got a healthy bank account, and that's not that there aren't issues, but we have worked in this country to create a society that is comfortable for people, not for everybody. There's all those usual caveats, but what you're seeing is a bunch of people, and Interior is a great example of that, the Interior Department. They're taking those things that give us wealth, our public lands, the ability to go hiking or fishing, our education, our healthcare. They're taking those things and they're turning them into cash, and they're putting them in their own pockets. And to me, it just feels like generations of Americans have worked to create a wealthy society, and that is being turned in, that's where it's being sold at auction, and people are walking away with the cash. And I can't tell you how angry that makes me.
Well, here's my question then. I hate to go into this argument of like people vote against their own interests, because I've always felt, Heather, that they don't vote against their own interests. If you look at the way people vote, it tells you what their interests actually are, where the priorities lie. But why then, Heather, are people voting to have their resources, their wealth extracted from them, to put these tech bros and oligarchs in charge, these vampires in charge?
So, I do think at first level, I don't think a lot of voters expected that they were going to get the Department of Government Efficiency, or expected that they were going to get the kinds of immigration sweeps we're seeing. And mind you, that was in many cases a willful ignorance. It just by chance the other day, I had to read through, I was looking for something, so I had to read through the letters I'd written in 2024. And literally there is a day when Trump says, if I don't get full immunity, I'm going to go after everybody in the Biden administration when I get reelected. It's like, he said it. Like, why is anybody surprised that he's doing it? And he said it again, Project 2025, all that stuff. So I don't think people expected to get what they got. So first of all there, but this is one of the reasons I do what I do, is, go back to the film, real power comes not from hate, but from truth. I really think that the American narrative, really since at least the 1980s, got taken over by people who were not embracing truth, but were rather advancing a narrative that said the reason that your life sucks is not because automation has taken your jobs, and not because we have economic policies that have transferred more than $50 trillion from the bottom 90% to the top 1% between 1975 and 2021. The reason that your economic life and therefore your cultural life and so on has gotten so much weaker than it was since the 1970s is because of those people. And those people are Black and brown and women who want to work outside the home, and usually Democrats. And that now we've had for 2 generations, and it's incredibly powerful. The idea that Democrats are socialists who are just handing things to Black people. I remember saying once years ago, if this is all a setup by Black people, they're not very good at it because they're losing an incredible percentage of income and of wealth and so on. So maybe that's not really the story. And people getting just furious with me that of course this is what's happening. And it wasn't. So I actually think that one of the things at stake and one of the reasons we watch films, right, is because of the narrative that the radical right imposed on the United States. And which is a very comforting narrative. It's you like Han Solo or Luke Skywalker against the empire, which is taking all your hard work and using it for somebody who shouldn't have any value, which is, by the way, also how the administration continues to go after immigrants, saying that they are sucking up tax dollars, which is just the opposite. They're bringing tons of money in here. I really think that narrative has been key to warping our politics since the 1980s, since Reagan rose. And one of the things that I do, and that I think you do as well, is you just try and push back against that, not with another false narrative, but by saying things like, actually, immigrants bring in tax dollars. They don't take tax dollars, stuff like that.
Yeah, I keep thinking, so much of this is a healthy byline in this film about the mythology of Lincoln, but now I'm thinking about the mythology of Reagan. And I just saw my local congressman, Jeff Hurd, celebrating Reagan's birthday recently, talking about all these great things that he did. And I'm like, wait a second, you've got a complete destruction of the middle class as a direct result of Reagan's policies. There was nothing done on AIDS in the 1980s for all of these different things. And he was just a hot mess looking at this as a historian. And yet, Heather, the story of this idea that Reagan is tied to American prosperity is completely false. Am I right? I mean, it's I don't know how to combat this other than say, wait a second, look at the numbers. And then I'm told, you're a liberal, you're making the numbers up.
Well, that's the other thing, that the numbers are liberal, right? And just to be clear, when we say liberal, that's not democratic. This is one of the speaking of narratives, the idea that capital L liberals are destroying American society comes from a 1954 book by William F. Buckley Jr. and his brother-in-law, L. Brent Bozell, called McCarthy and His Enemies. And what they argue in that book is that Joe McCarthy, who goes after anybody he considers to be a communist, basically because he wants attention, anybody who doesn't agree with McCarthy is trying to destroy America by making it socialist. And so they capitalize L to suggest that it's an organized group like Communist China. And they sweep in not just Democrats and independents, but also Republicans in that. That's going to be Eisenhower. That's going to be Nelson Rockefeller. That's going to be anybody who isn't part of this far right, very small faction of the Republican Party in the 1950s, that has now become MAGA. So that L liberal idea is, yeah, sure, I'm a liberal. And that idea that somehow anybody who disagrees with them is on the far left and a liberal is an epithet. It was not an epithet until they made it one really in the 1990s. It started in 1954, but by the 1990s, it becomes an epithet. And it was a term that Republicans would have embraced and did embrace in the 1950s and the 1960s and even into the 1970s. That starts to change with Reagan. But Reagan's a slippery character because he governed one way and he talked another way. So there's something for everybody in Reagan.
Is socialism the most misunderstood word in the United States? Like you mentioned, socialism gets used as the socialist policy is this, and it's a scare word. And I think I went to a public school. I go to national parks. I enjoy these things that the people put together. Like, where does this fit in?
So when historians talk about socialism and then communism as well, they're referring to an economic and historic system. And, the what happened in the United States is that the word socialism is really a political word. And by that, I mean, and you've heard me say this a million times, that in the period immediately after the Civil War, former Confederates in the South turned against the idea of civil rights for Black Americans, for their Black neighbors, because they didn't want them to be equal. That was, on racial grounds. They just did not want these people to be equal. And then we get the 14th Amendment in 1868, which says states can't discriminate based on race. And then in 1870, we get the 15th Amendment, which also says Black men are going to vote. Black men actually start to vote in 1867 with the Military Reconstruction Act, which says in order to write new state constitutions, you got to let Black men vote for them. So I saw on the internet recently something where somebody totally misunderstood that very famous Harper's Weekly cartoon that has the Black men voting. That was actually from the Military Reconstruction Act of 67. But what happens is that the U.S. government creates Congress, creates the Department of Justice in the department in the federal government in order to protect civil rights among Black Americans in the South. And it does so in part because of the rise of the KKK after the war, the Ku Klux Klan, as one of the gangs in the South, which is a white supremacist gang that's killing Black people and raping them and assaulting them and so on. And once that happens in 1870, it becomes a federal offense to discriminate against or to assault a Black American based on race. So something really interesting happens in 71 in South Carolina. And what they do in South Carolina, which is a majority Black state, what they do is the former Confederates say, we don't have any problem with race. We never had any problem with race, which is complete BS, right? It's the same guys who a year ago were like, kill all these guys. They start to say our real problem with having Black voting is that Black people don't own any property, because, of course, they weren't allowed to before the war. And they don't have any education, because they weren't allowed to have any education before the war. So by letting them vote, what you are doing is you're permitting poor people with no education to have a vote. And what they're going to do is they're going to vote for roads and schools and hospitals and the kinds of social things that people want, which, by the way, white people would have used as well. But the only way that can be paid for is with white tax dollars. So if you let Black people vote, they're going to redistribute wealth from hardworking white people to benefits for undeserving Black people. And this idea of a taxpayers' revolt, there was one in 71 and then one in 74, cements the idea that letting minorities vote and later on letting women vote is going to be a form of socialism, because it's going to involve a redistribution of wealth. And this takes off in 1871 because in March of 1871, the communards in Paris take over the city of Paris in the wake of the Franco-Prussian War, and they control Paris from March through May. And that becomes incredibly popular in the US because we have just laid down the transatlantic cable, which is very expensive. And Americans love to hear about the Franco-Prussian War. Now the Franco-Prussian War is over. So what are you going to do? You're going to have headline news about the Paris Commune. And in the United States, the idea of poor workers taking over a government becomes tangled up in images of the Paris Commune, which nobody understands. And they simply say, oh, look, if you let workers have a say in society, they're going to destroy it. They're going to destroy it right down to gender roles, for example. That's where you get the idea of the women with the bottles full of petroleum and the rags going under the buildings that had became known later on as Molotov cocktails. But at the time, this is a big deal for the Petroluzes, as they were known. And that idea that if you let poor people vote, they were going to destroy property and level the society so that nobody wealthy had anything and it all got redistributed, becomes in the United States known as socialism. And that idea of socialism takes off in 71. Like you can do a search of the New York Times and they barely mention socialism. Before that, it's kind of associated with the Oneida community or some of the utopian communities. Goes off the charts in 71 and it never comes back down. And it becomes associated in the United States later on with the economic system that really takes off in the Bolshevik Revolution after 1917. But it's a political term. And the reason that's very, very important, that idea that if you let poor people vote, they're going to redistribute wealth, because essentially we have always had a trading economy that had regulations put on it. And that idea that regulations on a trading economy is somehow going to destroy things is really quite the opposite of what happens. Now, interestingly enough, the reason I'm so into socialism and the word is because I got wondering one year, because I was going to teach it, when did we start using the word capitalism? Because Lincoln and his people talk about capital all the time. And they talk about capitalists, which are people who have capital. But they never use the word capitalism. So I started to think, when the hell did they start using capitalism? And as near as I can tell, and I haven't never written this down because I need to do more research on it, they begin to use the word capitalism in the same way that they have used socialism. That is, socialism means poor people voting and controlling the system with their votes. Capitalism says that people with capital ought to be the ones controlling the political system. And that takes off in the 1890s. And that difference between a political system embraced by the words socialism and capitalism and the economic system that it has come to represent, I think matters a lot in American history. And it's really quite different than the way we understand it in other countries.
I want to pull back to Lincoln for a second, because this is another thing that I often see widely misunderstood, and I think purposely so, on social media and things like this. I'm just kind of doom scrolling. Heather, Lincoln was a Republican. Absolutely, right? What does that mean in 1860 versus what does that mean in 2026? And would Lincoln be a Republican today based off of everything that you know the man?
No, just think about vampires. The Southern Democrats are the vampires, and the Republicans rise to fight them. And that's actually a really interesting moment, because it's a moment not unlike the present, where a number of people who weren't paying a ton of attention to politics and just sort of generally voted Whig or voted Democrat or Free Soil or whatever, weren't paying a ton of attention to the political system. The Free Soilers were, but they weren't a very big group. And they become aware, as does Lincoln, of the vampires taking over the system after 1854 in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, that essentially says that enslavement will spread throughout the entire country, including the North, because if you let enslavement spread into the Old West of the Louisiana Territory, those new slave states will work with the Southern slave states to overawe the Northern free states in the House of Representatives as well as the Senate, and they will make slavery national. So once they figure that out, they get together and they say, listen, we don't agree with each other about immigration or finances or internal improvements, but by God, we know we don't want to be ruled by vampires. That's not what they call them. They call them a slave power. And that's where you get the Republican Party. It begins as an anti-Nebraska party, that is, they're against that law. And in 1959, Lincoln articulates a new vision for the American government that is actually based on what he calls a conservative vision. Because American conservatism, there really isn't one, because there's not much for America to conserve when Edmund Burke is talking about the rise of conservatism during the French Revolution. But conservatism under Edmund Burke argues for a positive use of government. Not just that government is bad, but government can be good. That's one of the reasons Burkean conservatism is so important as an intellectual development in government. And what Lincoln says is that he's a conservative. He believes in conserving what is best about the nation, and he roots that belief in the Declaration of Independence, the idea that everybody is created equal, has a right to equal access to resources and to be treated equally before the law, and to have a say in their government and consent to their government. And that conservatism is nothing like today's conservatism, which is exactly the opposite. And what happens is through the 19th century, and these things are going to waver for sure, but throughout the night, especially in the Democratic Party, but throughout the 19th century, the Republicans stay on that side. They go back and forth, but you've got Teddy Roosevelt, you've got Garfield, you've got all those guys. What really changes this equation is the 1965 Voting Rights Act, because you go into that, and until that period, you still have the Dixiecrats, you still have the Southern Democrats who want no part of desegregation at all, right? And in that moment in 65, that's a Democrat who pushes that through. And what happens is that the Democrats and the Republicans both, after you get the 65 Voting Act, which is going really to support Black and brown voting, they have to decide, what are they going to do? Are they going to try and court Black and brown votes? Are they going to try and court the Dixiecrats? And in that moment, and it really comes out of 64, even before Nixon and even before the Civil Rights Act, you have the Republicans under Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater going, hey, yeah, we'll go for the Dixiecrats. And in 64, Strom Thurmond, who is a staunch Democrat, switches parties to support Goldwater. And it's not clear in 68 whether Nixon will go that direction or go back to sort of the Eisenhower, we're going to promote civil rights direction. And he decides that he's going to go full-throated for the Dixiecrats. And he goes down and he courts Strom Thurmond and says, stay being a Republican, and I will stop using the federal government to protect desegregation in the South. That's the Southern strategy. And then, of course, by the time you get to Reagan, Reagan is talking about states' rights, and he's talking about, he gives that speech 3 miles from where the 3 civil rights workers were killed in 64. And you see the Republican Party going down the road of, we're going to go for the white nationalists, although they don't call them that at the time. The Democrats, in contrast, say, yeah, we're going to make an effort to pick up Black voters, brown voters, and women. And they start down that path, and they get shellacked in 72. And they get shellacked in 72 for a number of reasons. They get hurt badly in 68 with the DNC debacle. They get shellacked in 72 in part because they have dramatically reworked the way that they do their primaries and the way they do the national convention. But they read that, I think, incorrectly, to think that what they need to do is to continue to try and pick up the white voters that they're losing. And of course, you see this dramatically after the election of Reagan in 1980. And one of the things that Biden, I thought, was so interesting about is he basically said, I'm not going to try to pick up those voters anymore. I'm going to honor the base of the party here. And that was, I think, a real coming of age moment in the Democratic Party. So they have utterly switched sides, and the real switch happens after the Voting Rights Act.
What about with Lincoln himself? We talk about him as the great emancipator, the rail splitter, all of these things. Does his mythology begin during his presidency, or does this happen as a result? I often wonder, Heather, what happens to Lincoln if he's not assassinated, if he's got to deal with the messy process of rebuilding the country politically? What happens to his legacy afterwards? Like, what do you think happens there? I mean, where does Lincoln's mythology kind of begin, and where does it go?
Okay, so if Lincoln is not assassinated, and if he lives, there are certain people who think that he was already quite ill. I'm not going to take a position on that. One of the things he's not going to do is he's not going to fight with Congress during Reconstruction. And he's not going to pardon all the former Confederate leaders. I mean, right out of the box, neither one of those two things is going to happen. And all of a sudden, the entire trajectory changes because those two things created the crisis that we got with Andrew Johnson. But in terms of his mythology, people hated him when he was in office. I mean, they just hated him. And, who was it? Was it McClellan who called him the original guerrilla?
Mm-hmm.
And nobody thought he was doing the right thing. People were complaining from one side or another. It's one of those things that everybody thought they knew how to do things better than he did. I will say he was intensely political, as was his wife, and that stood them in very good stead because they were able to make their way through a lot of problems that other people probably wouldn't have done. He also let people vent so long as the ball was moving forward, and that mattered a lot. Had he lived, though, I suspect we would have thought of him like FDR, probably. that he did, he changed the entire world, and we recognize that and we honor that, but at the same time we recognize his human failings, would be my guess. I will also say that had he not died, and this is one that haunts me and may haunt you, we know that his sons spent an entire day locked in a room burning his papers, and who knows what was in them. And we would have known a very different Lincoln, I suspect, had he had control over what got handed down to us.
We think of, I had Jelani Cobb on recently, and we were talking about the film Lincoln coming out during Obama's presidency, these attempts to lionize both men. And I'm kind of wondering, aside from Lincoln himself, who's not around to enjoy his own status as this moral authority, like, who else benefits by this creation of Lincoln as this something other than a man, this great human? Like, who else stands to gain from the creation of Abraham Lincoln?
I think that's a complicated question, because there is the benefit for those of us who are vampire hunters to be able to say, I'm on his team.
Yeah.
But there is also, I think, on the other side, the ability for people to say, oh, he was just like a saint handed down from heaven. He did it all himself, and nobody else can ever do something like that, because it takes away the agency of everyday Americans. And one of the things I like to point out about Lincoln is I do think he was a genius for many reasons, but he did not come down from the heavens. The American people created Lincoln. That is, he was a corporate lawyer. He was somebody that had an undistinguished term in the House of Representatives, but he listened to what people were saying after the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 54, and he listened a lot, and he weighed different arguments against his understanding of the U.S. Constitution, which was quite deep. And from that, he articulated a new vision of what the government could do to support its citizens. And that did not come from him. You can see him if you read his papers, and these are available online. You can see him working out these issues and figuring out, what should the government do, and how should it do it? And there's fragments of his papers where he says, what a government should do is what individuals can't do for themselves. And, scratching down on envelopes or scraps of paper, different ways to think about the government. And he's not doing that because he doesn't have anything else to do for the afternoon. He's doing it because this is what he's hearing at political speeches, reading in newspapers. He's kind of making the sausage that's getting tossed in. And that humanity of him, I think, is important for people to remember, because he was, as I say, a genius. And I visit him. If I have a temple in the United States, it's a Lincoln Memorial. But he was just a person, and he did what he did because of all the other people around him who worked with him, who managed to put him in place to become what he did. But that also, as I say, erases, turning him to a myth erases the fact that he was the head of a movement. He wasn't the whole movement.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of like Harriet Tubman and maybe Frederick Douglass in this, wondering if like the creation of Lincoln himself, like this larger than life persona, starts to overwhelm at times, like the memory of Black folk who were also fighting for their own freedom and moving forward, Robert Smalls and all these amazing men and women. I kind of wonder who gets left out of the picture because the image of Lincoln is so, because he blocks out the sun.
Blocks out the sun is a good way to put it. And there's a great contrast there, I think, between him and Robert Smalls that you just made. What Smalls did really was heroic. That is, he knew how to pilot a boat through the shoals of Charleston Harbor and in that area. And he was enslaved, and he memorized all that stuff in his head. And then, which again, maybe that's not heroic. Maybe if you live in that area, like I know where all the rocks are around here, I don't know if the sandbars shifted, but he knew how to do that. But he also observed his surroundings so that he knew all the Confederate signals. He knew where all the Confederate torpedoes had been laid. He knew the way that people looked at certain times. He managed to gather up in a really unobtrusive way friends and family and put them on the planter, the ship that he was about to take. And then he managed to navigate it out past the guns under extraordinary stress by using his knowledge both of the water and of the signals and of where the torpedoes were. And then he took that knowledge to the US Navy. And of course, the US Navy sees the ship coming toward it. They don't understand at first that it's been stolen. That is a great example of somebody whose personal courage and the value of what he brought to the Union Army's Navy, in this case, got obscured by Lincoln, who certainly was a man of great intellectual courage and political courage. But sometimes how it's a little hard to see Lincoln doing that in the way that Robert Smalls did. And everybody knows Lincoln, and not so many people know Robert Smalls.
Yeah, I'm waiting for my Robert Smalls film. I mean, we only recently got our big screen Harriet Tubman film. We're still waiting on our big Frederick Douglass. And we could just list Black folk, whose stories need to be on screen.
Frederick Douglass is harder, I think, because so much of what he did was oratory. Like, you want, if you're going to do a film about Lincoln, you've got the war, you've got the Mississippi River, you got all that stuff. Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and what do the slave, you have to center it around what do the slaves of 4th of July. And I would think, I'm not a filmmaker and I have no interest ever in being one, but I would think it would be harder to find those sorts of dramatic moments in Douglass's later life. His escape from enslavement, of course, is huge. Yeah. I think that's the most courageous thing in all of American history because it was a psychological fight. But I can see why it would be harder to do somebody like Douglass. But Smalls is begging to happen because then he has this incredibly powerful political career afterward. And his house is still standing in Beaufort, South Carolina.
Yeah, where's my Michael B. Jordan as Robert Smalls film? This is so easy to create. You create a possibly handsome man who sells a whole bunch of movies. We saw Sinners. It was brilliant. I'm waiting for that film. But now I'm thinking about Theodore Roosevelt and George Washington and, FDR, right? Lincoln's not the only dude who gets mythologized we hear the founders, and it almost becomes this thing, Heather, in discourse where we can't question the founders, although these are some impossibly compromised men. Why do democracies need these founding mythologies, these people that we turn into superheroes?
So, I'm going to say something slightly different, and now everyone's going to hate me.
Go for it.
You know what jumps out to me about Teddy Roosevelt? Who
go on.
I'm a huge fan of Teddy Roosevelt. Let me just start by saying that. I do not think Theodore Roosevelt is a deep thinker by any stretch of the imagination. What jumped out to me about Roosevelt, the more I've written about him a lot, is he articulates values. That is, and to me, this is often the hardest part about doing what you and I do, is that it's really easy to carp about something or someone. It's because you're guarded. You can say, oh, that's stupid. I don't have faith in that, or he's going to lie to you or whatever. That's really easy to do. But it's really hard to say, I care about American democracy, or I'm going to throw my heart into this project because I think it's a good one, because then you are literally putting your heart out in public. And when I think about someone like Teddy Roosevelt, I think that one of the key reasons he was so important is not that he got that much through Congress. He got almost nothing through Congress. He did do some stuff through executive orders, but that he articulated for other people values that the nation needed. And so, one of the things that makes it harder for somebody like Harriet Tubman is she was all action, and what we have recorded of hers is good, but there's not a lot of it. Mm-hmm. Similarly, Frederick Douglass, he's got some great epigrams, but he was an orator, right? They're quite long. Nobody remembers Edward Everett. They remember who was the great orator that was with Lincoln at Gettysburg. They remember Lincoln because it was 3.5 minutes long and it was all full of epigrams, right? So when you think about myth making, I do think there is an element of the idea, at least in the United States, that the people who become mythological are the people who articulate something that the American people want to believe in. And they are doing so in such a way that they're putting their hearts out there. And that is a different kind of courage. And one of the things that jumps out to me is everyone thinks about Roosevelt and his speech about the man in the arena, that, you guys can all stay on the corners and complain, but it's the guy who's in the arena who's trying to make it happen. You can bitch at me all you want, but at least I'm trying to move the ball forward. And what always jumps out to me about that particular speech is, who had that over his desk? This will shock you.
Who?
Elvis had it over his desk. Elvis had a copy of that over his desk. And that, because that's that idea that you're gonna dare to put your heart out in public, that's pretty damn rare. And so when you think about FDR, of course, FDR accomplished a ton. I mean, so different than Teddy Roosevelt. But we remember him talking about, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And, I'm taking on the malefactors of great wealth. Partly they had good speechwriters, but I think partly Teddy Roosevelt wrote his own speeches, but partly they articulate the longing of a people for a society that is decent and that is good and that is just. And so there is perhaps a part of our mythologizing of them that is about civic religion, if you will. They are, in a sense, truly our gods or our saints, because they articulate that idea of a society that embodies those things. Just a thought. I don't know. Haven't given a ton of thought to this, but makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But here's the thing with mythology, we're talking so much about the intersections between pop culture, American memory, American identity. Heather, where's our Theodore Roosevelt film? Why don't some of these men and women get the big screen? Is it cost? Is it like Lincoln's got a few recently, including this one where he's got vampires, but where's our FDR film? We've got a Washington movie coming out through a faith-based production company a little bit later this year that we're going to be unpacking. But why don't we have we just got a Reagan-esque film recently, but where's our TR movie?
Well, don't you think the new film about Bob Dylan tells you something about that? That is, if you're going to do one of these on a film, you'd have to pick one very small slice.
You do.
Teddy Roosevelt going down, was it the Amazon that almost killed him?
I'm thinking Candace Millard's book, immediately, River It Out, immediately. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the story you have to tell. This broken man who's questioning everything at that point in time, because it's telling you stories not about him, but the human condition maybe. But where is it? Yeah, Roosevelt books sell.
Yeah, so I learned something once. I assume it's true that, Lincoln biographies, there's like a new one every day, or, it's rivaled only by biographies of Theodore Roosevelt, which aren't quite as many as Lincoln, but there are that many of them. But yeah, I would think if you were going to do that, you would have to, grab just one piece of it, like Candace Millard did for Garfield. And that's maybe, I mean, I'm not a film person, but by the way, speaking of film, I absolutely love the book Story by Jonathan McKee. Do you know that book?
No, tell me.
It's about screenwriting. And again, I'm in absolutely no danger of ever writing a screenplay. I used to love those bumper stickers that said, I'm writing my screenplay. But it's about how you tell a story. And it's, I started to annotate it once and I realized I was writing on every line. It's about how you create a narrative, a powerful narrative. So if you haven't read that, and obviously whatever is good for you can take a lot of those lessons and put them into novels or into nonfiction like we write. So that's a good one.
We are expounding a lot on American history and these films and things like that. I want short answers now, Heather.
Okay.
We're going to try to do this lightning round thing. It's the second time we've ever tried to do it. We just did it with Clue, actually, which is the episode coming up after yours, which was a blast. So are you ready to have some fun with this? We'll try it out. All right, let's do this. Give me short staccatoed answers on this. We'll just kind of go from there. Lincoln, More myth or more man?
Man.
Is the Great Emancipator a helpful title, or is it too tidy?
Too tidy.
Most misunderstood founding figure?
Jefferson.
Ooh. If Lincoln were alive today, would he have a social media account, and which one would he use?
He would, and it would be, unfortunately, I don't know those ones out there. He had a really raunchy sense of humor.
Instagram.
That I assume is some of what got burned up.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't begin. All right. Now you got my thinking. Okay. Which president would secretly enjoy being a Marvel superhero, and why?
Oh, that's a fun one. Well, the obvious one there is Theodore Roosevelt, but let's pick somebody less obvious. Here we go. John Quincy Adams.
Why?
Because John Quincy Adams really shone in the House after he was president, because he was like, screw you, I don't care what the laws are. I'm going to keep on doing this because I'm doing what's right. I think we could fit him right in a little leotard and send him up to the stars.
Maybe LBJ? He's got the ego for that, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, he does.
I mean,
he does. Yeah.
I'm thinking that. And you mentioned earlier, like who would be on Lincoln's team? My first thought was John Quincy, right? Him and his daddy was my first thought as far as presidents go. Which era of American history is most misunderstood right now?
Reconstruction.
Well, that adds to my next question, because is Reconstruction, Heather, America's unfinished monster story?
100%.
Okay, well, a thing you and I fight daily. If misinformation is the contemporary vampire's bite, stay with me here. Should historians be vampire hunters? In other words, Heather, what are we doing here? What is the role of a historian in 2026?
Well, the role of historians in general is to explain how and why societies change. But in 2026, I think the role of historians is indeed to be vampire hunters, to try and help people understand the truth of what is going on. And I don't mean some philosophical truth. I mean to say, in fact, people who live in Puerto Rico are American citizens.
Well, that brings me to these ideas here now, right? We're talking about this incredible time of myth making in the United States during the Civil War, Reconstruction. We've talked about some of these other people. What about now? We've got a pod out right now talking about smallpox during the American Revolution, and I'm thinking about our responses to COVID. Is this one of these key moments in American history where we are right now? Are we in a myth-making moment here? And if so, what's the story that's going to be told in the next 100, 150 years?
I believe, yes, we are in a myth-making moment. But I don't think we know what the story is, because our great heroes haven't emerged yet. Which is kind of some of the fun, I would love to do this in 10 years. And you and I will both say, wow, we didn't see that coming, because we are in the process of creating the next American hero or the next American heroes. And I could give you a bunch of suggestions, but who the hell knows? Who the hell knows, who is going to end up being the people who help lead us out of this mess?
Is the struggle today about facts or identity?
I think it's about facts. I think we will build our identity around those facts.
I guess maybe the last question here on this entire thing is this. What would Lincoln, the real one, not the vampire hunter, or maybe he is, I don't know. What would he tell us about democracy? What would he want us to know today?
Honestly, I think that's quite simple, right? He said it in the Gettysburg Address, that it is for us to be here dedicated, to make sure that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Sort of the quotation for all the vampire hunters out there, right? That's what we're trying to do, is to protect American democracy. And with luck, make it better for the next generation.
Could Lincoln get reelected if he were alive today? If he were a vampire? If he lived forever, could Lincoln get elected in 2028?
Yeah, I think he could. I think somebody who talks like Lincoln is, and I don't mean that literally, right? But those basic principles of economic prosperity, the idea of treating people equally before the law and protecting civil rights, I think those are eternal. And the idea that those were relevant only at certain times in the United States, I think is just wrong. I think that it's not illegitimate to say that we have been fighting in this country between the people who want that and the people who want to live off others since the beginning. And that's actually why I wanted to talk about the Vampire Hunter movie, because here we are fighting the same fight again. And when we do manage to put those vampires down, we do have a good society, at least for a little while.
You have any final thoughts on this film?
I think people should see it. I think it says a lot about the modern moment, which is why I'd love to hear what the director and the writer were about when they wrote it 15 years ago.
Well, if we say that you want to have them on the podcast, they'll probably show up.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I got Zwick on here. We can get the other people on here, right? Which, I mean, I don't have the pull that you have, but I'm like, listen, Heather said you should come on my pod.
You know, I would love to talk to them about why they did what they had in mind. This is your world, not mine. But the way this maps so completely over modern America is really uncanny because, as you say, it's not a new film. Unless it's maybe that this is what I see everywhere.
No, I think when this film, I think this movie was so smart when it came out, people missed the point.
That could be.
I think people got wrapped up. It's like, oh, because it's very flashy. You got the really fun montages with the axe. And I mean, who doesn't love that? This is a crazy smart film that really deserves to be looked at again. So, all right, we're talking about the past all day. What's in the future for you? You've talked about this book. Like, what are you doing? What comes next for you? What are you up to?
I'm trying to put better guardrails around my days so that I'm not up all night. Speaking of vampires, because I desperately, you know how it is. There's this book is burning a hole in my stomach, and I still write the letters every day, and I do interviews, and I do a pod, and I do all this stuff. But like, you know, when you want to write something, you really want to write it. It's not like, you know, it becomes like an impulse that you can't not do. So my goal going forward is to get enough of a handle around my time so that I can spend a couple hours a day writing this book, because I really want this book out there.
I want to read it before it comes out, but I feel like I'm gonna get to anyway. All right. We're gonna call this an episode, Heather, because I could talk to you for a few more moments after we're done here. I want to brag on you now real fast. You have been such a guiding light for me. Thank you for everything you've done for me, and frankly, for everything that you do for all the. I talk to other scholars out there, and they're like, Heather is just this role model for so many of us. So I like to make you embarrassed, and that's what I'm doing now. So thank you for being on this.
That's lovely to hear, because I feel like I never do enough. You know, so many. Can I just give you a pet peeve here?
Please.
Oh my God.
What?
So many people are writing so many good books. I bet there are like at least 5 good books a day. And I just, every once in a while, I'll put on social media, we need a moratorium. You all have to stop writing books for like 2 years so I can catch up. And somebody wrote to me just the other day, and I'm not going to identify it because I haven't actually read the book yet, but they said, would you read this book and maybe consider blurbing it? And I wrote back to the person, I said, you're killing me, because no, I didn't have time to do this at all.
Right.
I can't do this. But I have waited for this book to be written for my entire freaking career. I can't blurb it. I'm telling you up front, I can't blurb it. But if you are willing to send it to me under those circumstances, I've waited for this book for 30 years.
You have to tell me off the air.
The woman just wrote to me and she said, I'll send it to you. Do whatever you want with it. And I was like, yes. But that's my pet peeve. Is like, obviously I want to write for this person and I want to read these books. And since we've been sitting here, somebody wrote to me and said, I sent you a dissertation. You haven't read it yet and commented on it. And I'm like, I haven't written yet tonight.
How do you have time?
I don't.
I don't. I think you're actually undead. I think that's actually. That's actually what we're discovering here. Is that you don't sleep. I
shouldn't say how cool would that be.
Cool.
But if I could have 24 more hours every day, think of all the great books I could be reading.
Oh my gosh! Can I tell you what I would do with this pod if I just had more time to write and read? And I don't. And I was telling Amy the other day, I feel like right now I'm caught in this thing where I've got like, I can do 2 of 3 things. And so right now the pod and the sub are like what I do. And like all the other fun things that I like to do are just right now, this is the priority. And like for you, it's even more like, I know you don't sleep.
It's like Henry says to Abraham, right? You won't have a family, you won't have friends. This becomes this battle is all consuming. And I tell you, when I heard that last night rewatching this, I was like, oh crap. Maybe I am part of the anti-vampire crowd.
Good. Well, we'll have to commission somebody to create images of us as vampire hunters along the way, and we'll put that on the pod. So, thank you. We finally did this 3 years in. I was like, can you please come on? So, thank you.
So next time we'll do Sweet Home Alabama, which is about Reconstruction
and vampires.
No vampires in that one, but lots of
We can make
history.
it about vampires.
We could, I suppose we could.
It's undying love, Heather.
It's about the reconciliation of the North and the South after the Civil War.
I know. We're going to do all that. All right, I'm hitting stop. Hold on. And that's a wrap here at Reckoning with Jason Herbert. Thank you so very much to our guest, Heather Cox Richardson. Heather, God, this was 3 years in the making, and I can't tell you how much you mean to me and everything you've done for me and the rest of these people out here who are listening to this pod. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our producer, my axe-wielding producer, Fletcher Powell, for being here and helping us fight the vampires of misinformation out there. I'm going to hold him here, guys. Thank you. And most of all, thank you to all of you. And thank you to the new listeners out there who are being here for the very first time. Hey, if you like this pod, there's a whole bunch of other movie podcasts, a whole bunch of other stuff on the West, on public lands, on native land, on history. Check them out. There's a bunch of stuff. I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast and keep listening. You can also find my writing at jasonherbert.substack.com and subscribe here. So thanks for being here, guys. Ciao for now.